This is the chicken who controls Trump. Monterey Corporation, the fourth largest chicken producer in the nation, is one of the top contributors to Trump and the MAGA movement. In 2016, when Trump launched his political career, Monterey was a top 5 donor. That has continued with tens of millions in contributions to Trump and the MAGA movement over the last decade. It has all been done with incredible secrecy, and it has bought incredible influence. Chicken producers like Monterey have become the dominant food companies on the planet. 70 billion chickens are slaughtered every year, and archaeologists say future generations will dig up their skeletons and see the modern era as the age not of Homo sapiens, but of Gallus domesticus, the chicken. This growth is partly because the chicken industry is one of the largest beneficiaries of corporate welfare.
Mr. President, you're going to sign an executive order today about meat packaging plants.
With billions of taxpayer dollars handed out to companies like Monterey, chicken has even affected our spiritual life. Monterey executives have held key positions at the National Prayer Breakfast, the religious event that every president since Eisenhower has attended. The influence of that event is part of the reason that every US dollar says the words, "In God we trust." And it all comes back to this. This is the story of the animal cruelty funding the MAGA movement. At the height of the Great Depression, as banks failed and millions lost their savings overnight, starvation became a reality for the first time in this nation's history. The government solution was a chicken in every pot, and that promise was delivered. In 100 years, chicken went from being an insignificant part of the American diet to the dominant source of protein for humans on the planet Earth, with 202 million chickens killed every day. In terms of the numbers killed, it's as if we dropped 1,000 atomic bombs on chickens every 24 hours. But this shift didn't happen naturally. It was driven by 2 choices by the American government. The first choice was the choice to launch government handouts for farmers. In 1933, as farms were going bankrupt across the nation, FDR passed the first farm bill, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, to address a national economic emergency. The law designated nearly 10% of the entire federal budget, $250 million, to provide handouts to farms. But what was supposed to be an emergency program became a permanent part of our political system. Even as farming became big business, handouts in the Farm Bill skyrocketed. The most recent Farm Bill in 2018 cost $867 billion, which is a 100x increase in real terms since 1933. The Farm Bill has been described as the largest corporate welfare program in history. The second choice by the US government was allowing the use of drugs in animal feed. Before the 1950s, it was impossible to raise chickens in large flocks because disease would kill them all off if crowded. Antibiotics and other so-called growth-promoting drugs changed that and allowed for farmers to crowd tens of thousands of birds in a single shed. We now use more than 4 times as many antibiotic drugs on factory farm animals than on human beings. And chickens grow to 5 times the size of chickens in the 1950s. There are a lot of companies that have benefited from corporate welfare and drugs, but among the most prominent is a little-known company in Arkansas called Monterey. The chicken industry was not always a giant. Monterey was founded in 1914 as a feed company, back before chicken was big business in America. But as corporate welfare and drugs made the chicken industry more profitable, Monterey moved from feeding chickens to killing them in 1959. The business has grown immensely since, with acquisitions of slaughterhouses, hatcheries, and distribution centers across the nation. Monterey is now one of the largest poultry companies in the world and does billions in sales every year. But what has made Monterey distinct from its corporate competitors is its investment in politics. Beginning around 1980, Monterey's owner Ron Cameron began making contributions to Republican politicians. It started small, with $2,500 to Ronald Reagan in 1980. Federal law at the time prohibited corporations and tycoons from giving more. But after the Supreme Court opened the floodgates to corporate donations with the Citizens United case in 2010, Cameron made his first big move into politics. A $600,000 contribution to a political action committee called Arkansas Horizon. That PAC, which was financed primarily by Cameron, used a huge surge in last-minute spending to help knock out the incumbent Democrat in Arkansas, Senator Mark Pryor, and replace him with a conservative firebrand named Tom Cotton. Right after that Monterey donation, Cotton made a statement arguing the government should cut food stamps from the Farm Bill, but he was notably quiet about corporate welfare. In 2016, Monterre went all in for Trump. Even as other Republican donors withheld their donations, Monterre's owner, Ron Cameron, opened the financial spigot. On June 30th, 2016, days after Trump secured the nomination, Ron Cameron and his wife Nina each gave $446,000 to a PAC called Trump Victory. In August 2016, Cameron gave another $2 million to a PAC called Rebuilding America Now, which was run by Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager, who ended up in prison a few years later in a money laundering scandal. Monterre was one of the 5 largest donors to Trump that year, but Cameron barely received any attention. By donating primarily through so-called super PACs, committees that are technically independent from a candidate and therefore can take unlimited donations, Cameron and Monterre made it hard to follow the money trail. Documents we've obtained from FEC records, however, show tens of millions in contributions to right-wing candidates over the last 8 years, including Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn. The biggest recipient of Cameron's donations, however, has been Trump. After a brief interlude with Nikki Haley last year, Cameron gave another $1 million to MAGA Inc., a super PAC supporting Trump. That has given Monterre enormous influence, even as the company has been implicated in environmental and labor scandals, polluting the drinking water and endangering employees with dangerously high-speed slaughter lines. Trump has gone out of his way to protect Monterre. Monterre and Big Ag made an investment in Trump, and it paid off hugely. Trump's ascendance in 2016 came with a massive surge in corporate welfare to factory farms. Direct payments to farms increased nearly 300% under Trump, reaching record levels. Trump also weakened regulations of Big Ag, including ending the so-called animal welfare rule. Under federal law, organic animals are required to have access to the outdoors. Trump allowed factory farms to meet this requirement with a tiny porch, even if the animals never stepped outside. But the biggest payoff for Big Ag happened when COVID-19 hit. Slaughterhouses were hotspots for the spread of disease. One study found that 8% of COVID-19 cases nationwide came from slaughterhouses. But Trump ordered the slaughterhouses to stay open as critical and strategic for national security. Bizarrely, he admitted later that the real reason for the order wasn't national security, but the industry's liability problems. Sick workers were suing slaughterhouses for forcing them to work in dangerous conditions. But Trump's order immunized the companies from liability. And one of these companies was Monterre. On April 3, 2020, shortly after the pandemic broke, Monterre announced that numerous employees at one of its meatpacking plants were sick with COVID-19. At least one employee was hospitalized. Just days later, Trump issued the order requiring slaughterhouses to stay open and got rid of Monterre's liability problem. Monterre rewarded Trump and his party with a series of large donations that summer, including a 6-figure donation to an obscure Republican legal organization. Even with increased scrutiny of COVID-19 at meatpacking plants, however, Monterre remained shrouded in secrecy. Indeed, in the years after the COVID outbreaks, the company continued to lobby to reduce transparency in its supply chain. Its moves were described by Farm Action, a nonprofit that supports local farmers, as slimy. What is Monterre trying to hide? Farm Action asked. But Monterre is a privately held company and has no disclosure requirements. So no one knew what Monterre was trying to hide. Until now. In the summer of 2023, animal rights activists, including the former Baywatch actor Alexandra Paul, decided to take a look inside Monterre's factory farms. They took huge risks in doing so. Animal rights activists have faced felony charges for merely taking photographs of abuse in labs, slaughterhouses, and factory farms. But Alexandra and other activists felt the public needed to see what was funding the MAGA movement. And in multiple visits to Monterre locations over a 13-month period, this is what they found. Crowding. Tens of thousands of animals crammed so tightly in sheds they were trampling each other to death. Disease, animals suffering from antibiotic-resistant infections, including salmonella, a bacteria that sickens tens of thousands of Americans every year. Starvation. In one of the cruelest ironies, numerous animals collapsed and unable to reach food and water. Activists found sick and injured animals who were too weak to stand and left to starve to death over multiple days. This is a violation of the company's own policies. This is a violation of animal cruelty laws. And this is what is funding the MAGA movement. Every US dollar says "in God we trust," but "in chicken we trust" might be more accurate. One of the reasons Monterre has faced so little scrutiny is because of its ties to powerful religious groups. A secretive organization called The Family runs the National Prayer Breakfast, the most important religious event in America. Every president since Eisenhower has attended the breakfast.
Michelle and I are truly honored to be with you this morning.
And it was the founders of the breakfast who pushed the government in the 1950s to print on every dollar the words, "In God We Trust." But today, it's not God we trust, it's chicken. For the last 2 decades, the National Prayer Breakfast has been funded and run by Monterre. Monterre's owner, Ron Cameron, joined the board of directors of the family in 2001 and began funneling millions of dollars to support its mission. His colleague at Monterre, W. Dobbs Cavan, became the family's president in 2012. But while the family claimed the moral high ground, it has been racked with sexual scandals. More disturbingly, the family sent $20 million to Uganda to support politicians and laws who sought to make homosexuality punishable by death. And it's all being supported by Americans buying chicken at the grocery store. Chickens are everywhere, the dominant force on this planet, but they're also nowhere. Think about it for a moment. Hundreds of billions of chicken skeletons are filling landfills across the globe. But when was the last time you saw a chicken alive? It's not until people like Alexandra walk into factory farms that the public actually sees these animals face to face. Usually the animals are just cogs in the engine of our food system, and increasingly the engine of our political system too. But something amazing happens when we take the animals out of that engine. We see them for who they truly are. This starts with what we hear. We've all heard a dog or cat in pain. Animals cry in the same way a human child can cry. Scientists have found dozens of distinct vocalizations in the common chicken that express a range of emotions, from joy to fear. Chickens have a unique sound for what's called tidbitting, when they repeatedly pick up and drop morsels of food to encourage their babies to eat. And they have a scream of terror when they see an aerial predator in the sky. Yet at places like Monterre, no one ever hears the chickens scream. But this bird was 1 in a billion because someone, Alexandra and her team, heard her cries, and they responded by taking her out. She received emergency care, including a sling that helped her stand. She saw sunlight for the first time in her life and felt grass beneath her feet. She tried delicious new foods with bright colors that she did not know that food could even have. And maybe most important, she felt what it meant to be safe. And when an animal feels safe, even if she's hurt or broken or at the brink of death, she can come back to life. The same is true of the broken systems in which we live. Food, politics, religion. These broken systems will die unless we make them safe. But the only way to do that is to turn away from companies like Monterre, companies grounded in cruelty and death. If we can do that and save the sentient beings of this earth instead of slaughtering them, we'll bring our nation and our planet back to life.